Please comment where you're watching for, and please consider becoming a channel member to support our channel. His name was Kyle. We matched on Snapchat's dating section, something I usually avoided. But that night I was bored scrolling, half watching a show in the background. His Bitmoji looked normal enough, baseball cap, hoodie, tired eyes. His profile didn't say much, just painter, music addict, looking for someone who doesn't flake. I should have taken that last part as a sign. We snapped a few times. He was always quick to open messages. He used a lot of filters, dog ears, sunglasses, voice changers. It annoyed me, but I wrote it off as harmless. He asked for selfies, and I sent a few, nothing risky. He kept complimenting me, but in a way that felt off. You look soft, like I could pick you up. You'd be easy to fold into my arms. I bet you smell like vanilla or coconut. It wasn't vulgar, but it made my skin crawl a little. When I didn't respond fast enough, he'd send strings of messages. You there? Don't ignore me. I told him I wasn't comfortable with how pushy he was, that I didn't owe him instant replies, that I wasn't interested anymore. I blocked him. That should have been it. It wasn't. The next day, I got a friend request on another platform, from a random account with no profile picture. I declined it. That night, I got a snap from a new username, F0LDUN2me. Blocked. Then another. Then another. Each time, a new variation on his name. All blocked. I started locking my Snapchat settings. Made my location private. Told my close friends to keep an eye out for anything weird. I changed my profile photo and username. Then I forgot about him. For a while. 2 weeks later, I went to my best friend Jess's house for a sleepover. We'd done this since high school, movies, snacks, talking until 2 a.m. Her parents were out of town, and it was just the two of us, curled up in her basement with popcorn and face masks. Around midnight, I went upstairs to get more soda. That's when I saw it. A shadow outside the glass door. At first, I thought it was a tree. Then it moved. I froze. There was a man standing on the patio, wearing a hoodie, and a mask, plain white, like a blank Halloween prop. His hands were pressed to the glass. Watching. I whispered for Jess. She came up, saw him, and gasped. We turned off the lights. Crawled away from the door. Jess grabbed her dad's old baseball bat from the closet. I called 911. While we waited, we peeked again. He was still there, holding something up to the window. A phone, with Snapchat open. My profile photo. My username. A message typed out on the screen. Shouldn't have blocked me. Jess's dad got home 10 minutes later. He'd come back early from a trip. When he saw the guy on the patio, he stormed out the front door, circled around, and tackled him. Held him down until the cops arrived. It was Kyle. He had 3 phones. A knife. A set of printed photos, screenshots from my stories, my selfies, my Bitmoji. He'd found Jess's address through a tagged location from a post I'd made weeks earlier. He never said why he wore the mask. Maybe he thought it made him unrecognizable. Maybe he thought it made him special. He was arrested that night for trespassing, stalking, and unlawful surveillance. His Snapchat accounts were reported, deleted. His devices were seized. I gave a statement, got a protection order. But for weeks after, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at my phone, wondering how many times I'd shared too much. Rowan smelled like cedarwood and wine, and the first time I kissed her, I got lightheaded. It wasn't the kiss, not fully. It was the build-up, the 2 weeks of flirtatious texts, long phone calls, and voice notes that sounded like secrets whispered through a screen. It was how she talked about books with reverence, and how she made ordering takeout sound like a moral decision. It was the way she asked questions like, "What part of yourself are you still afraid to write about?" We met at a reading for an indie lit journal neither of us were published in. She was sitting in the back row, legs crossed at the ankle, notebook open on her lap. I noticed her before she noticed me. She laughed too loudly at a line that wasn't meant to be funny, and I decided I liked her immediately. Afterward, I complimented her boots. She said, "They make me taller and less emotionally available." I said, "They're failing at one of those things." Her eyes crinkled. She said, "You're trouble." I said, "Only if you're writing about me." I didn't know then that she would be. Our first date was a creative high. We didn't just talk, we riffed. We layered metaphors over memories, spun stories from shared glances, sketched out imaginary lives we'd never lived but still wanted to try on. She asked if I'd ever written something I didn't want anyone to read. I said yes. She said, "Then it's probably the only honest thing you've written." We slept together that night. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't performative. It was the kind of physicality where bodies ask questions and trust the answers. Her breath caught when I bit her collarbone. She pulled my hair when I kissed her thighs. We didn't say much after. She curled into me like she belonged there. In the morning, she stole my hoodie and half my croissants. When she left, she kissed my neck and said, "You're a good story." I thought it was a compliment. We fell into a rhythm that felt intoxicating. She'd come over late, barefoot, with wine and ideas. We'd cook, or more accurately, I'd cook while she danced around my kitchen, reading aloud from essays she was workshopping. Sometimes we'd work side by side, laptops open, legs tangled, trading lines and headlines and edits like currency. She once asked if she could read my journal. Not out loud, just silently. I hesitated, then handed it over. She read 5 pages, then pressed her palm over her heart and said, "You write like you're bleeding on purpose." I didn't know if it was praise or concern, but I let her keep reading. She was magnetic in the way that made you ignore your better judgment. I told her things I hadn't told anyone, about my father's silence, my compulsive need to be chosen, the time I almost quit writing because I was afraid I had nothing original left to say. She listened like everything I said was gold. She'd curl next to me after sex and ask questions like, "If you could write a story that no one could trace back to you, but it was your truth, would you still publish it?" I said yes. She said, "Me too." I didn't know then that she meant my truth. The first time I saw my words in her work, I thought it was coincidence. A caption under one of her poems on Instagram. Some people confuse vulnerability with access. I'd told her that, word for word, over wine a week earlier, while talking about my ex and how she treated my openness as a utility. I commented, "Beautiful line." She replied with a wink emoji and nothing else. I brushed it off. Writers bleed into each other. That's the nature of intimacy and influence. Right? It kept happening. Snippets of conversations, phrases I'd said during pillow talk, stories I'd shared in confidence, started appearing in her essays, her captions, her spoken word pieces. She gave them no context, no credit, just transplanted them into her work, polished and reframed. One line in particular gutted me. He told me he was afraid of being ordinary, so he became performatively broken. I'd said that after a fight with my brother. I remembered the room we were in, the light, the wine, the way she'd nodded and said, "That's a hell of a sentence." Now it was hers, claimed, branded. And me? I was nowhere in the footnotes. I asked her about it one night. We were tangled in my sheets, the room still warm with leftover lust and lemon candle wax. I said, "Can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" She said, "That's never a good start." I said, "Are you using my stories? In your work?" She didn't deny it, just shrugged. Writers are thieves. You knew that. I sat up. There's a difference between being inspired by someone and extracting them. She pulled the blanket over her chest. "You never said it was off limits." I stared at her. "Is that how this works? If I don't explicitly say don't steal this, it's fair game?" She looked at me like I was being precious. "You're a writer. I thought you'd understand." I did understand. That was the problem. I stopped seeing her after that. Not dramatically. No big fight. Just a slow fade out. Less texting. More silence. A goodbye that never really happened. She didn't chase me. And maybe that's what hurt most. 3 months later, she published an essay. It went viral. Shared by literary accounts. Quoted in captions. Featured in a small but influential digital magazine that paid its writers an exposure and Twitter clout. The essay was about a man. She never named him. But I saw myself in every paragraph. She described his apartment in detail. Books stacked like altars, a record player that only played sad women, a kitchen that smelled like burnt garlic and hope, and I knew it was mine. She described our first date, our first kiss, our first fight, reframed into something more dramatic than it was. She described his sadness like it was an animal she'd tamed. And then she ended it with a line I'll never forget. I didn't fall for him. I fell for the way he let me shape his story. I didn't message her. I didn't comment. I just closed the tab and sat with the dull ache of being reduced to material. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that, for her, connection was a transaction. That she didn't love me. She loved what I gave her access to. My pain. My process. My words. She hadn't seen me as a partner. She saw me as content. I still write about her sometimes. Not directly. Not by name, but I write about how it feels to be known only in fragments. To be loved for your language, but not your silence. To be curated instead of cherished. I write about the danger of inviting someone into the sacred and watching them turn it into spectacle. I write because that's how I reclaim the pieces. Because if I don't write it, she still owns the ending. These days, I guard my creative process like it's a vein of gold. Not because I'm bitter, but because I've learned that some people don't want to create with you. They want to feed off you. They want the intimacy of your ideas without the effort of building something real. So I choose more carefully now. Not just who I share my body with, but who I share the inside of my mind with. Because the stories I carry, they're not just stories. They're me. And I deserve more than to be a footnote in someone else's masterpiece. Julian asked if he could take notes the first night we met. We were sitting on the floor at a publisher's after-party. Cheap wine, good lighting, everyone pretending to like each other more than they did. He wore a dark sweater and corduroys with a rip at the knee that looked deliberate. He held his glass like it was a prop. He asked questions that made people pause mid-drink. He turned to me after overhearing a comment I made about how loneliness isn't always loud. "Say that again," he said. "But slower." I laughed. "Why?" He tapped his phone. "I collect lines like that. Don't worry, I'll attribute it." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. But I was flattered. I gave it to him again, word for word. I should have known then. Julian was the first man I'd dated in years who seemed genuinely interested in my interior life. He'd ask things like, "What's the hardest truth you've had to carry alone? And which ghost still sleeps in your bed when no one else is there?" He listened like a writer, attentively, with his head tilted slightly, as if making space for the shape of your words. He told me he was working on a collection of essays, a meditation on intimacy in the digital age. I told him that sounded vague enough to be published. He laughed. "I like to keep the pitch blurry. The heart of it is personal." I should have asked, "Who's personal?" We started spending nights together. First in his place, books stacked against the walls, a coffee table made of milk crates, a mattress on the floor like he was still committed to struggle, even though his Substack had 30,000 subscribers. He read to me in bed. James Baldwin and Carson, parts of his own drafts. He'd pause sometimes and ask, "Too precious?" Or, "Does that sound like I'm trying too hard?" I loved that he let me in that way. I thought it meant trust. I started sharing my own stories. Quietly at first. Then with more courage. Experiences I hadn't written about yet. Things I hadn't even said aloud before. The time my mother stopped speaking to me for 6 months. The relationship that unraveled because I couldn't say, "I'm sorry," until it was too late. My complicated relationship with silence, with shame, with being seen. He asked permission to write down my words. I always said yes. I thought it was ours. The first time I saw myself in one of his essays, I didn't realize it was me. It was published on a mid-tier literary site. The title was something like "The Women Who Teach Us How to Bleed Beautifully." Pretentious, yes, but familiar. I read it in bed, smiling at lines that felt like ours. A metaphor about ghosts. A joke I'd made about the way I arrange my books by mood, not genre. A whole paragraph that mirrored a conversation we'd had walking home from dinner in the rain. I texted him, "Hey, this is beautiful." He replied, "You inspired it." I felt proud. Then I read it again. And this time, I noticed the way he never said she. Never said my partner, or someone I love. Just a woman, the woman, one woman I knew. Not a person. A device. A symbol. It kept happening. Every new essay, every new post, came with a strange sense of déjà vu. Details that were too precise to be coincidence. Phrases I'd said, now polished and recontextualized. Once he wrote about a woman who fears being ordinary so deeply she performs empathy like a ritual. I had said those exact words to him about myself after a night of crying in his arms. He'd kissed my forehead, then filed it away. I asked him about it. "Are you writing about me?" He didn't deny it. He just said, "I'm writing through you." I asked if he could warn me next time. If he could at least let me read the pieces before they went live. He said, "That would compromise the integrity of the work." I said, "What about the integrity of me?" He smiled like I was being sentimental. "You said I could use your stories." I had, but I hadn't said he could make them his own. What hurt wasn't just the use of my stories. It was the erasure. He never said my name, never acknowledged what we were, never gave shape or credit or intimacy to the real person behind the prose. He turned my vulnerability into metaphor. And then he sold it. Our final unraveling came quietly. He was reading a new piece out loud, workshopping it for a reading. It was about a woman who always cried after sex, who never said "I love you" until it was too late, who collected her pain like souvenirs. I sat across from him, heart pounding. I had cried after sex. Twice. With him. The second time, I told him I was afraid he didn't actually see me. In the story, the woman says, "I think you only want me for the way I break." In the story, the man replies, "I want you for the way you still believe." He looked up from the page. "Too much." I said, "Did you write that for me or about me?" He said, "Does it matter?" I stood up. "It does to me." He looked confused, like I'd missed the point. "You're not the only one who's ever cried after sex," he said. I didn't reply. He went back to his notebook. I left that night with my toothbrush and a pair of socks that weren't mine. He didn't call. 2 weeks later, the essay was published. It went viral. People praised it for its tenderness, for its insight into the female psyche, for how well he captured a kind of woman they all seemed to know. No one asked if she'd given him permission. I started writing again. Essays of my own, but not about him. Not yet. I wrote about consent in storytelling, about the ethics of inspiration, about how easy it is for men to mine women for their most intimate truths and walk away holding the credit, the applause, the narrative. I didn't name him, because I don't need to, because this isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. These days, I hesitate when someone calls me muse. It no longer sounds like a compliment. It sounds like a warning, because I am not a metaphor. I am not your essay. I am not the scaffolding for your self-discovery. I am a person, not content. And if you want to write about me, really write about me, then you damn well better write to me first. It was late September when I met Eider. Not the crisp, golden kind of September where the leaves look like they're posing for Instagram, but the kind where everything feels like it's been sitting in lukewarm water too long. The air was thick. The mornings started cool, but by noon, the sun would push through like it was punishing us for hoping summer was over. I was swiping half because I couldn't sleep and half because I'd made this vague promise to myself to say yes more often. It sounded brave in theory. In practice, it mostly meant agreeing to things I'd normally roll my eyes at, like dating apps. Eider's profile was weirdly curated. Not in a bad way, just deliberate. A few black and white photos, one of him sitting at a cafe table with a book I'd pretend to have read. Another of him on a hiking trail, arms crossed, like he was daring you to say you didn't like nature. His smile was small, private. He said he worked in architecture and loved thunderstorms and red wine, which made me cringe a little. That combo felt performative, like a dating profile Mad Lib. But still, I swiped right. We matched within minutes. The conversation started stiff. He called me intriguing, which made me feel like a puzzle, but we found our rhythm when we started talking about movie endings. His favorite was Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Mine was The Social Network, not because it ended well, but because of how cold it left you. He said that was kind of dark. I said, exactly. Our first date was at a tapas place that always smelled like burnt manchego. He walked in wearing a soft brown sweater and jeans that fit a little too perfectly to be casual. His voice was smooth in a way that made me think he could read crime statistics and still make it sound like a bedtime story. When he asked me questions, it wasn't just what I did for work or where I grew up. He wanted to know about my past relationships. On a first date, he framed it like he was curious about how people heal. And in the dim glow of the candle between us, it almost sounded sincere. There was something about the way he tilted his head when I spoke, like I was feeding him something delicate that he didn't want to drop. After dinner, we didn't say goodbye right away. We wandered through the neighborhood, stopping at a bakery that was still open, the kind that sells cookies the size of your face. I remember brushing crumbs off my chest while he walked close beside me, not touching, but near enough that I could feel the warmth of his arm. He looked down at me and said, "You have this low laugh." I smiled. But the thing was, I don't. 2 nights later, we saw each other again. He texted me that morning. Said, "Can't stop thinking about that smile." Half of me was flattered. The other half, suspicious. He invited me to his place for dinner. He lived on the top floor of this old building with no elevator and a hallway that smelled like paint and popcorn. His apartment was cold, minimal, like someone had Googled masculine interior aesthetic and just bought everything on the first result. Black couch, white walls, gray rug. There were no pictures, no knickknacks. Even the books on his shelf looked untouched, except for the 3 identical copies of one title, a novel I'd never heard of. When I asked him why, he said, "It's that important to me." He didn't elaborate. I didn't ask again. We sat on his couch, our knees brushing. He poured us wine, red of course, and put on a playlist that sounded like every song had been selected to seem effortless. We talked about family, about fear, about whether we believed people changed or just revealed more of who they've always been. At one point, he touched my wrist, tracing the edge of my bracelet with his fingertip. "You always wear this?" he asked. I looked down. I wasn't wearing a bracelet. "No," I said. "I'm not." He just smiled like I'd said something clever. Later that night, we kissed. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was slow, like he was memorizing something. His hands were warm on the sides of my face, gentle but deliberate. There was a moment, just a flicker, where I thought I could fall into this. I could lose track of where I end, and he begins. But then he pulled back, looked into my eyes, and said, "You'd look incredible with red hair." I laughed. "What, like in middle school?" He shrugged. "Just curious. I think it'd suit you." The next time we met, he brought me a scarf. Deep green. Not my color. Not even close. But I wore it anyway, out of politeness. He smiled like I'd passed some kind of test. That smile, it wasn't joy. It was satisfaction. Like a sculptor admiring the clay midshape. By our 5th or 6th date, things had started to itch. We were in a bookstore, his idea, and he pointed out a girl with red hair near the fiction section. "She looks like Amanda," he said. I asked who Amanda was. He paused a little too long. "My ex." That was the moment everything clicked. The red hair. The bracelet. The scarf. All the compliments that didn't quite apply. He wasn't seeing me. He was trying to summon someone else, using me as the base material. I didn't say anything that night. But from that point on, I started noticing how he watched me. Not like someone in love, but like someone checking a blueprint. Every time I tried to steer the conversation towards something light, funny childhood moments, weird dreams, he pulled it back to identity, core truth, the architecture of the self, as he called it. It all came to a head the night he walked me home. It was cold and quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a dare. He stood on my doorstep with his arms crossed, rocking slightly on his heels. Then he leaned in, hugged me too tightly, and whispered, "Just one kiss." I pulled back. No, not sharply, just firmly. He froze, then stepped away, pretending like he hadn't asked. I said good night and shut the door. I stood there for a while, forehead resting against the wood. My heart wasn't racing. It just ached, like the vibe had cracked and something sour had leaked in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up every hour, checking my phone even though it hadn't buzzed. Until 3:07 a.m. Ida was calling. I didn't pick up. Then he called again. And again. After the 3rd time, a text popped up, "Look outside." And I did. Just barely opened the curtain. He was standing across the street in the middle of the road, holding his phone up like it was a mic, singing. Not yelling. Not dramatic. Just singing softly, like it was a lullaby. I couldn't make out the words, but it was slow and haunting and off-key in a way that made my stomach twist. I didn't open the window. I didn't text him back. I called the police. Gave them his name and what I could see from the window. He didn't run or hide. Just stood there, singing, like it was the final scene in a movie only he understood. The officers arrived 10 minutes later. One walked over, said something to him, and Ida just nodded and got into the car. No resistance. No anger. Just this eerie calm. After that, I blocked him. Phone, social media, everything. Even deleted his name from my contacts, so I wouldn't have to see it ever again. For days, I felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, a message, a letter, something poetic and unhinged. But nothing came. Just silence. I told a few friends. One of them, half joking, said, "It's like he was trying to build a Frankenstein version of his ex." And yeah, that wasn't far off. Okay, so I met this cute guy on Tinder. All was going well while messaging, so I decided to bus over one night to hang out with him. I lived in a decent-sized college town, so public transit was a normal thing. Anyways, sounded like a good idea in theory, yes? Wrong. I have IBS and an anxiety disorder. We all know where this is going. Ladies, you know the feeling. When you're on the way to hang out with a guy, and your stomach turns to knots, and you're debating on canceling. Why do we all do this? However, unfortunately for me, This feeling overtook me while I was already on the bus. I felt the horrendous stomach ache and anxiety being to creep on. Bubble guts ensued. I told myself no problem. I'll hop off the bus super quick to stop at a connivance store. Only minor problem. I realize we are already in the suburbs, and I am 5 minutes from his house. I have to accept my fate. By the time I get off the bus, I am bending over in pain trying to suction the shit inside of me from leaving my body. I end up nearly running to his house to try to save my favorite American Eagle jeans. I get there and greet him, and politely ask to use the washroom. I turned on the faucet to try and drown out the sound of me literally dying. I was having some of the most extreme IBS shits of my life. Not only that, but my stomach was so upset that I started violently puking up my guts. So loud. There's no way that faucet was drowning out the noise of anything at that point. I had accepted the fact that there I was, stuck in a hot guy's washroom, absolutely obliterating it. I hoped I could just blame it on food poisoning and spend the night watching movies on the couch. I was planning my whole act when I went to flush. And then the unimaginable happened. I clogged the fucking toilet. I have never clogged a toilet in my life, and of course it had to happen right then and there. So I did what any rational person in that situation would do. I left. I simply put the seat down, ordered an Uber, washed my hands, and left. Told him I'll be right back. As soon as I left the house, I blocked him on everything. It has been 3 years, and I'm still ashamed and mortified. This poor boy had to deal with all of that and unclog his own toilet while just trying to get some pussy. It started with a snake emoji. That's what he sent after I commented on his profile bio. Snake dad. Terrarium engineer. Cold-blooded friends only. I thought it was a joke, or at least ironic. His pictures didn't scream exotic pet guy. He looked more like a barista or a plant shop owner. Soft flannel, sleepy eyes, a tattoo of a fern leaf on his wrist. We matched on a Sunday night. He told me his name was Eli. He was 31, worked as a freelance illustrator, and lived about 15 minutes from me. He sent me a picture of his studio, a second bedroom with 3 bookshelves and a large glass tank in the corner. She's shy, he said, referring to the snake. But she's good company. I wasn't sure how to respond. I've never liked snakes. But I tried to keep an open mind. People love all kinds of pets. I figured if he was responsible and gentle with it, it was just a quirky detail. He asked if I wanted to get a drink later that week. I said yes. We met at a bar near my apartment, low lighting, good cocktails, quiet enough to talk. He arrived wearing a canvas jacket and a crossbody bag. Nice to finally meet you, he said. He smiled, then opened the bag. Inside was the snake. A small, pale corn snake with rust-colored markings, coiled in a clear plastic container with air holes. This is Persephone, he said, like he was introducing a friend. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. He placed the container on the table. She gets anxious when she's alone too long, he said. But don't worry, she's contained. The bartender did a double take. I tried to act normal. We ordered drinks. I tried to focus on the conversation. He was interesting, in a rambling, intense kind of way. Talked about Greek mythology, reptile heating lamps, and how he'd once designed an entire deck of tarot cards based on venomous animals. I nodded, sipped my drink, and tried not to look at the snake. When he asked if I wanted to feed her, I said no, thank you. He teased me, said I was emotionally distant. I laughed awkwardly. When the bill came, he insisted on paying. I said I had to head home, early morning. He asked if I wanted to see his place. Just for a minute, he said. Persephone likes new people. I declined. He didn't push, but his smile faded. Maybe next time, he said. I walked home, half smiling at the strangeness of it all. Later that night, he texted. You have a good energy. Persephone was calm around you. That's rare. I didn't respond. The next morning, he sent another. I had a dream you were holding her. She wrapped around your wrist like a bracelet. I muted the conversation. 2 days later, I came home from work to find him standing on my porch, holding the same crossbody bag. I froze. He waved. I think Persephone escaped, he said. I blinked. What? I was cleaning her tank, and she slipped out. I think she might have followed your scent. I stared at him. She's really smart, he added. They can track heat and pheromones. I took a slow breath. Eli, you can't just show up at my house. He looked confused. Hurt. I thought you'd want to help. I don't, I said firmly. You need to leave. He didn't move. I pulled out my phone. He saw and stepped back. Okay. No need to call anyone. I just thought. You thought wrong, I said. He walked away, muttering something about people being closed off. I locked the door, closed the blinds, sat on the floor, and tried to slow my heart down. That night, I texted a friend and told her everything. She told me to report him. I didn't yet. I wanted to believe it was just a weird misunderstanding, that he'd leave it alone. But the next morning, there was a note tucked under my windshield wiper. She still hasn't come home. I think she's with you. I reported it. The officer raised an eyebrow when I explained. A snake? Yes, I said. But it's not about the snake. They filed a report. The next day, I found a shed snakeskin on my doorstep. I bought a camera. Eli never came back. I don't know if Persephone ever existed. Maybe she did. Maybe she didn't. But I still check under my bed before I sleep. I met Marin at a friend's engagement party. One of those events where you only know 3 people, all of whom are busy slow dancing or making small talk in elevated voices. I was hovering near the punch bowl, pretending to be interested in baby photos on the fridge, when she walked up behind me and said, "Wow, you really picked the loneliest corner." I turned. She was holding a glass of white wine and wearing lipstick the color of rust. Her smile curled, like she was always on the verge of saying something that would either ruin your life or make your whole day. I said, "I'm just pretending to care about someone else's toddler." She said, "You're doing great." Very convincing. I laughed. She introduced herself. "Marin." I repeated it back like I was trying it on. She stayed by my side for the rest of the night. We talked about everything, the absurdity of wedding hashtags, our mutual fear of horses, her brief but intense summer job as a birthday clown. She was magnetic in the way only people who don't care what you think can be. When I left that night, I had her number saved under Clown Girl. I changed it to her real name the next day. We started texting constantly. Her messages were electric, fast, unfiltered, full of random thoughts and weird TikToks and photos of pastries she said looked too smug for their own good. I never knew what was coming next, and I loved that. Our first real date was at a bar that used to be a church. We sat in a booth under stained glass windows and ordered cocktails with names like Sinner's Sangria. She wore a silver ring shaped like a snake and ordered fries with extra aioli. We talked about exes, bad first dates, the worst thing we'd ever done for attention. Hers faked an accent for an entire week of high school. Mine joined an improv team in college to impress a girl who transferred 2 weeks later. She said, "God, that's tragic," and touched her hand to mine. We kissed outside the bar. Her mouth tasted like ginger and gin. The next few weeks were a blur of late-night walks, rooftop wine, sticky hands at farmers' markets. She had a way of making everything feel like a scene in a movie. Not the main plot, something quieter. A side story you didn't see coming, but cared about more than you expected. She'd text me things like, "Your face is stuck in my brain like a song I can't Shazam." Or, "Do you ever feel like everyone else got the manual, and we're just winging it with duct tape and vibes?" I didn't say it out loud, but I was falling. Not in the dramatic, movie montage way. In the slow, steady kind. The kind where you start imagining how they'd look brushing their teeth in your bathroom. The kind where you save their voice notes and replay them when you can't sleep. She made me feel seen. Like I wasn't just some guy in the background. Like I mattered. Looking back now, I think she was always watching me a little too closely. Like she was memorizing lines for a part she hadn't decided if she wanted to play. The first crack came one night at a party she invited me to, her friend's birthday. Big crowd. Loud music. Everyone in thrifted outfits that looked somehow intentional. I was in the kitchen, sipping a beer and trying to figure out if the hummus was homemade when I overheard something. 2 of her friends, both a little drunk, both laughing. One said, "I can't believe she's still going with it." The other, "Honestly, I didn't think she'd last this long." Then, like a punchline, "I mean, look at him." They didn't see me. Or maybe they did and didn't care. I stepped away before I could hear more. Found Marin on the balcony, laughing with someone in a velvet blazer. I asked her to leave with me. She said yes without hesitation. We didn't talk about it that night. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was about someone else, that I didn't want to be the guy who made drama out of background noise. But the crack stayed. A few days later, I brought it up. We were at her place, eating ramen on the floor in front of her TV. I said, "Your friend said something weird at the party." She paused mid-slurp. I told her what I heard. She blinked, then smiled. "You think they were talking about you?" I shrugged. It sounded like it. She laughed. You're being sensitive. They were talking about Kyle. He's dating a girl he met in a parking lot. I nodded. Tried to believe her. Wanted to. But something about the way she said it, too smooth, too ready, didn't sit right. Things didn't change immediately. We still saw each other. Still kissed. Still shared dumb jokes and long stories and mornings where she made pancakes slightly burnt on one side. But I felt it. A shift. Like I'd lost the thread, and she was holding it just out of reach. The truth came out during a fight I didn't know we were having. We were on her couch. She was scrolling Instagram. I was trying to guess what movie she'd picked based on the opening music. She tossed her phone aside and said, "You've been weird lately." I said, "You've been distant." She said, "You're being dramatic." I said, "Are you with me or not?" She rolled her eyes. "God, you're really falling, huh?" I froze. "Excuse me?" She stood up. Started pacing. This wasn't supposed to be serious. I sat there, heart pounding. She kept going. It was a joke at first. "A bet." I asked, "What kind of bet?" She didn't look at me. "Just a stupid thing. My friend dared me to see if I could get someone to say I love you in under a month." My mouth went dry. "And I guess I picked you." Silence. She finally looked at me. "You were just easy to talk to." It became real. I didn't mean for it to. I stood. Slowly. "So I'm a punchline." "No," she said. "You're just not the plan." I left. She didn't stop me. I didn't cry until 2 days later, standing in my shower, hands braced against the tile like I was trying to hold up the whole apartment. It wasn't just the lie. It was the rewinding. Replaying every moment. Every compliment. Every kiss. Trying to figure out what was genuine and what was a setup. Trying to remember if she ever looked at me without calculation. She texted me a week later. "I'm sorry. I messed up. But I wasn't faking all of it." I didn't reply. Because it doesn't matter if some of it was real when the reason it started was a joke. You can't build trust on a dare. It's been months. I've dated a little since. Nothing serious. I'm slower now. More careful. Less ready to believe that charm equals sincerity. I still think about her sometimes. Not with anger. With something colder. A kind of numb disappointment. She was the kind of person who could make you feel like the main character. Until you realized you were just part of the trailer. Entry 1, February 3rd. First date with Jonah tonight. Met on Hinge. His profile was surprisingly open, like full sentences, proper punctuation, even a book quote that wasn't Murakami. Trust is the residue of promises kept. From someone named Frank Novoskay. I googled it. Not even a real quote. Still, I liked the vibe. We met at a little wine bar near my place. He was early. Wore a sweater that looked expensive but not flashy. His laugh caught me off guard, genuine. Warm. He didn't do the usual parade of questions. Asked me what I've recently changed my mind about. I told him I didn't think I wanted kids until last year. He didn't blink. Just said, "That's a big shift." What caused it? I liked that. We lingered for hours. Split a cheese plate. He walked me home, didn't try to kiss me. Just hugged me and said, "Let's keep doing this." Entry 2, February 9th. Third date. He brought me a book I mentioned liking in high school, The Bell Jar. Yes, I'm basic. No, I don't care. Inside was a note that said, "We can't protect ourselves from pain, but we can choose who we let see it." Who says that on a third date? But still, it made something in my chest loosen. We talked about fear, about trust, about how people say they want honesty, but what they really want is compatibility dressed up like courage. He told me he'd been cheated on once, years ago, and that it fundamentally altered how he moved through relationships. He said it without bitterness, just like a fact he'd learned to carry. I told him I've never cheated, but I've definitely made emotional exits before the physical ones. He said, "That's still a kind of betrayal." I didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. Entry 3, February 14th. Valentine's Day. He said he doesn't do Hallmark holidays, but he still showed up at my door with a thermos of hot chocolate and a playlist titled Warm Inside. We sat on my couch, watching half of a documentary about Icelandic architecture, then somehow fell asleep holding hands. He listens like he's taking notes. No, that's not right. He listens like he already knows what I'm going to say, and he's just confirming it. Entry 4, February 20th. Something small, maybe nothing. I got a weird message on Instagram. From a new account. No profile pic. Just a DM that said, Do you think Jonah tells everyone the same things? I deleted it. Probably a bot. Or a troll. But it scratched at me. Later, I asked him casually if any of his exes were unhinged enough to send cryptic messages. He smiled and said, "I've had people who didn't want to let go. But nothing recent." I wanted to ask more. But I didn't. We watched The Lobster and fell asleep again. This time, he stayed until morning. Entry 5, March 2nd. Okay, I'm writing this down because I feel crazy. I matched with someone on a dating app. Not seriously, I wasn't even planning to swipe that night. Mostly boredom. I've been exclusive with Jonah for weeks now. But I open the app, and suddenly there's this guy, Zach, with a face that looks eerily familiar. Same jawline. Same hair. Same city. Different name. I clicked through. There were only 2 pictures. The profile was vague. But something felt off. I messaged him, half as a joke. "Hey, you look like someone I'm already dating." He replied, "Maybe you're being tested." Then unmatched. My hands were shaking. I called Jonah. He didn't pick up. Texted me 5 minutes later. "Can we talk tomorrow? In person." Entry 6, March 3rd. I don't even know how to process today. He came over, calm as ever. Sat on my couch, same posture, same tone. And then he said, "I created a second profile. To see how you'd react." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He said it was a loyalty test. That he'd read about it in a psychology forum. That people often say they're monogamous, but don't act like it when no one's watching. He said, "You passed. That should feel good." I asked him if he thought that made it okay. He shrugged. I needed to know before I got in too deep. I've learned the hard way. I said something, I don't even remember what, and he just kept repeating, it wasn't personal. But it was, because I'd told him things. About my family, my fears, my past. I'd let him into the softest parts of me, and he'd used that access to build a trap. I asked him to leave. He did. No drama. Just nodded. Before he walked out, he said, "This doesn't mean I don't care about you. It means I care enough to verify." Entry 7, March 7th. I haven't heard from him since. I keep going over our conversations, trying to find the cracks, the clues. But he was so careful, so curated. I don't know what's more upsetting, the betrayal, or the fact that he never really became anything in my memory. He was always observing, never unfolding. He apologized once via text. "I know you feel hurt, but I was trying to protect myself." I didn't respond. Entry 8, March 11th. What does it mean when someone tests your loyalty instead of building trust? It means they want proof, not partnership. It means they're still living in someone else's betrayal. It means they're not dating you, they're dating their fear. And I'm not a litmus strip. I'm not an experiment. Entry 9, April 1st. I saw him today, at a bookstore. He didn't see me. He was standing in the psychology section, flipping through a book with a yellow cover. I watched him for a minute. He looked exactly the same. Still composed. Still curious. I turned and left before he could see me. I don't miss him. Not exactly. But I miss the version of him I thought was real. Entry 10, April 10th. I've started dating again. Slowly. Softly. I'm more cautious now, but not in the way Jonah was. I'm not testing anyone. I'm just listening harder. Asking better questions. And when someone tells me they trust me, I ask if they're willing to show that trust, not just demand it from me. Some people are. Some aren't. But at least now, I know what I'm looking for. Not perfection. Not proof. Just presence. And someone who sees me as a person, not a puzzle to solve or a variable to control. I deserve that. We all do. Elara asked for my birth time before she'd even asked for my last name. We matched on a dating app. Her profile was a blur of sun-drenched selfies, annotated star maps, and a prompt answer that read, "I'm not saying astrology is a science, but I am saying I won't date a Virgo rising again." I almost swiped left, but something in her smile stopped me. It wasn't soft, it was sharp, like she knew something you didn't, and she wasn't going to tell you unless you earned it. Our first conversation went like this. Her, "Hey, what's your big three?" Me, "I don't know what that means." Her, "Sun, moon, rising. Birth date, time, and place. I'll do your chart." Me, "Shouldn't we get a drink first?" Her, "I need to know if you'll ruin my life first." I laughed. Gave her the details. She replied 20 minutes later with a screenshot of my birth chart and this message. Pisces Sun, Capricorn Moon, Leo Rising. Emotional sponge, emotionally repressed, attention-seeking. Delicious. I texted back, that's a lot of contradiction. She said, that's what makes you interesting. She was right. Our first date was at a speakeasy hidden behind a laundromat. She wore a leather jacket over a silk slip dress and ordered mezcal without looking at the menu. She smelled like bergamot and recklessness. Within 10 minutes, she had my full attention. She talked fast, interrupted herself, used words like transit and stellium and natal wound, with the ease of someone fluent in an entirely different language. She told me she was a Gemini Sun, Scorpio Moon, Virgo Rising. I contain multitudes, she said, sipping her drink, and I'm very organized about them. I told her I liked that she didn't pretend to be chill. She smiled. Chill is just avoidance dressed up in linen. I fell a little bit in love with her right there. She was unlike anyone I'd ever dated. She didn't just ask about my past. She asked how my Saturn return had affected my decisions. She didn't just notice my patterns. She mapped them against lunar cycles. At first, I found it charming. Quirky. The way some people are obsessed with Myers-Briggs or Enneagram types. A lens, not a law. But with Alara, it wasn't just a lens. It was a doctrine. She'd say things like, you're pulling away, classic Pisces Sun under stress, or this fight is textbook Mars and Cancer behavior, and I'd laugh, thinking it was a metaphor. But over time it became clear, she wasn't joking. She wasn't interpreting my actions. She was predicting them. 2 weeks in, we were sitting on my couch, knees touching, when she pulled out a small leather notebook and started sketching something. What's that? I asked. She didn't look up. Your Venus placement is sextiling my Jupiter this week. I think we should see how that plays out. I blinked. See how what plays out? She tore the paper out, folded it, and tucked it into my hoodie pocket. Just be yourself, she said. This is fieldwork. I laughed. Are you studying me? She looked at me dead on. I'm studying what happens when Gemini and Pisces push past their incompatibility. I waited for the punchline. It never came. That night, I opened the note when she left. It was a chart, hand-drawn, with my name at the center and arrows pointing to various traits. One said, emotionally porous but seeks structure. Another, needs reassurance but hides it behind humor. I wasn't sure whether to be flattered or unnerved. I kept the note in my nightstand. The sex was good. Better than good. She liked control, but she wasn't rigid. She asked questions mid-act, whispered observations into my neck. You're so responsive. That's your Pisces Sun. Your hands are very Capricorn Moon. It was the first time I'd ever been astrologically dissected during oral. She made me feel desired. Studied. Like I was worth mapping. It wasn't until later that I started to feel harvested. The cracks started small. I'd suggest a plan, dinner, maybe a last-minute trip, and she'd say, that's not a good idea. Mercury's in retrograde. I'd try to talk about something real, my brother's divorce or my fear of turning into my father, and she'd pivot to my fourth house placements. One night, I told her I was feeling disconnected, that I wasn't sure she actually saw me, beyond what the stars told her. She smiled gently. I see you more clearly than you see yourself. I believed her. That's what scares me now. A few weeks later, I met one of her friends, Raina, a soft-spoken artist who offered me a joint and asked if I cried during Pixar movies. We were sitting on Alara's balcony, drinking wine out of mismatched mugs. Raina said, so you're part of the experiment. I froze. What experiment? She looked at Alara, who gave her a sharp glance. Raina laughed awkwardly. Oh, maybe you haven't told him. Alara stood. We're out of wine. She went inside. Raina leaned in. It's not shady. She's just trying to rewrite her dating patterns. You're part of the incompatible phase. Incompatible? Raina nodded. She's dating signs she's astrologically opposed to see what she can learn. You're her first Pisces. I suddenly felt very cold. Later that night, I asked her, calmly, quietly, if it was true. She didn't deny it. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. She shrugged. Would you have agreed to it? I didn't answer. She sat beside me, legs tucked under her like a cat. You're not a lab rat. I like you. I'm just trying to understand what makes connection happen even when everything says it shouldn't. I said, you reduced me to a data point. She looked genuinely confused. I didn't reduce you. I chose you. That's different. I didn't have the energy to explain how wrong that was. We didn't break up right away. I wanted to believe her. That I was more than a chart. That I mattered beyond my placements. but the illusion was broken. Every compliment felt coded. Every touch felt observed. I began to wonder if she was taking notes after I left. If every moment we shared was being filed away under Pisces, high empathy, low boundaries. One night, I found a document open on her laptop. Gemini Sun dating log. Incompatibility trials. My name was at the top of a column labeled mutable water. I closed the laptop and left without waking her. I didn't go back. She texted me the next day. I'm sorry you feel used. That wasn't my intention. I wrote back. You didn't date me. You studied me. She didn't reply. It's been 6 months. I still get horoscope emails, though I never signed up for them. Sometimes I read them, wondering if they'll say something about betrayal or misplaced trust. They never do. I've started figuring out who I am outside of how I was mapped at birth. Turns out, I'm more than my moon sign. I still believe in patterns, in energies, in the way people connect for reasons we don't always understand. But I also believe this. You cannot love someone through a filter and call it fate. Love is not about compatibility. It's about presence. And I deserve to be seen without a telescope. Adrian. That was hit name, and guess where we met? On a dating site, obviously. You laugh from the hips, he said, grinning. That's rare. I smiled. I wanted to believe I was rare. He was the kind of man who remembered things. That I liked my coffee oat milk light. That I always ordered fries even when I swore I wouldn't. That I hated the sound of metal scraping ceramic. He'd send me songs that matched my mood, recommend podcasts based on single comments I'd made. He used words like attunement and resonance, and I didn't even cringe. He brought me a playlist on our second date. Literally. Handwritten on a card with the Spotify link scrawled underneath. Songs that sound like you. The first track was Phoebe Bridgers, followed by Bon Iver. I told him I loved it, that it felt like someone had finally translated my thoughts into music. He said, "You're easy to read." In the best way. At the time, that felt like intimacy. Now it feels like a red flag I mistook for poetry. We dated for 2 months. Not long, not short. Enough to fold into each other's routines. Enough to feel real. He took me to the same cafe every Sunday morning. The barista knew our order by the 3rd week. He'd text me good morning with a line from a poem and good night with a voice note that usually included a sigh and the words, "I like this. Us." He made me feel like I was the only one he'd ever said those things to. Until I found out I wasn't. It started with a DM. From a stranger. Her name was Sophie. She sent me a screenshot of Adrian's Hinge profile. "Hey," she wrote. "Sorry to be weird. I think we might be dating the same guy." I stared at the screen for a full minute before responding. We compared notes. Same Sunday cafe. Same playlist, different title. Same compliments. Same voice notes, literally. She sent me one, and I played it next to mine. Same sigh. Same cadence. Same script. I felt sick. She said, "I thought I was being paranoid." But then he called me Sugar Bones. Has he ever said that to you? He had. Twice. I thought it was his nickname for me. Apparently, it was just part of the package. Over the next week, I connected with 3 more women. All of us had been seeing him within the same 3-month window. All of us had been told we were rare. All of us had been given playlists, handwritten cards, little rituals that felt custom but weren't. He was dating us like a franchise. Same script, different city. I confronted him. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just asked him, how many? He looked at me with that same warm smile, the one that had disarmed me, that I now realized was just part of his uniform. I didn't lie, he said. I never said I was exclusive. You said I was different. He shrugged. You are. They are too. I like people. I connect easily. That's not connection, I said. That's choreography. He tilted his head. What's wrong with making people feel good? I stared at him. Because it's not real. You're not in it. You're performing it. You're handing out intimacy like it's a party favor. He didn't reply. I left. He didn't stop me. After that, we started a group chat. The women, I mean. We called it the Playlist Club. We compared notes. Laughed. Grieved. Rewrote his messages like fan fiction. Made jokes about holding a reunion and inviting him as a guest speaker. It sounds like revenge. It wasn't. It was reclamation. I still see his name pop up sometimes. A mutual friend likes his post, or someone tags him in a photo. He's still smiling. Still charming. I wonder how many women he's connecting with right now. I don't hate him. That's the strangest part. I think he genuinely believes he's giving something. But he's not. He's just pressing play. I've started dating again. Slowly. Cautiously. I don't need the poetry now. I don't need a playlist or a ritual or a nickname that sounds like it came from a thrifted novel. I just want someone who shows up. Without a script. Without a sigh. Just real. Even if it's messy. Especially if it's messy. Because I'm not looking for someone who knows how to say the right thing. I'm looking for someone who means it. Lila was a voice before she was a face. That's how we met, on a dating app, sure, but the real hook came after a few messages when she sent a voice note instead of typing. Texting is too filtered, she said. I like to hear how people breathe between thoughts. Her voice was raspy and fast, like she was always slightly out of time with the world. She had one of those laughs that sounded like it surprised her every time. Short, bright, a little chaotic. I liked her immediately. We started trading voice notes daily. Sometimes 2 minutes long. Sometimes 8. Her messages were like audio postcards, little slices of her day, told in color and rhythm. She narrated everything, her walk to the grocery store. There's a guy playing the saxophone on the corner, and he's definitely making eye contact with my soul. The weird dreams she had. I married a dolphin, and it made a lot of sense at the time. Her thoughts on kombucha. It's like a tea that forgot how to be polite. I was hooked. Not just on her voice, but on the way she moved through the world. Like everything, no matter how mundane, was waiting to become a joke. Our first date was at a ramen place tucked into the back of a bookstore. She showed up in a yellow raincoat, hair in a messy bun, eyeliner slightly smudged like she'd been laughing too hard before she arrived. She hugged me like we were already friends. Over dinner, she told me she used to work in ad copy but quit during the pandemic to try being funny full-time. Now she made online comedy videos, short skits, voiceovers, rants about bad dates with good lighting. She had a decent following. Nothing viral, she said. Just small but feral. I asked if she ever worried about putting so much of herself online. She shrugged. People love the illusion of intimacy. I just give them enough to feel seen, not enough to find me. I nodded, even though the sentence made me feel a little cold. Still, the date was great. We laughed so hard the guy at the next table asked if we were on our honeymoon. It felt easy. Afterward, we walked through the bookstore. She picked out a collection of absurd short stories and handed it to me. This feels like your brain, she said. That night, she sent me a voice note. Had so much fun tonight. You're like a person I'd actually want to keep talking to. Weird, right? I replayed it twice. Over the next few weeks, we kept seeing each other. Nothing heavy. Just dinners, late-night walks, coffee shop meetups where she'd show me her latest video draft and ask for feedback. I loved watching her work. She edited fast, instinctively. She had a sharp sense of timing. Her comedy wasn't mean. It was observational, wide-eyed, a little chaotic in a way that felt sincere. Sometimes, she'd record voice notes while we were together. I'm with someone right now, and he just said the most unhinged thing about how soup is emotionally manipulative. I laughed. Are you recording me? She grinned. Just the vibes. I told myself it was harmless. Playful. Part of her process. And besides, I liked that she thought I was funny. That I gave her something to riff off of. It felt like being chosen. Until it didn't. It happened on a random Tuesday. I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw a video she'd just posted. It had already racked up 17,000 views in a few hours. The caption read, "Why I can't emotionally attach to men who own more than 3 jars of pasta sauce." I clicked play. There she was, hair up, hoodie on, sitting in her kitchen with a glass of wine and that familiar gleam in her eye. So I went on this date with a guy who has 5 jars of pasta sauce in his fridge. 5. Not different brands. Not like he's a sauce connoisseur. The same brand. Just stacked like trophies. I froze. That was me. I had 5 jars of Rao's Arrabbiata in my fridge, a fact she discovered while helping me put away groceries the week before. She kept going. He also thinks soup is emotionally manipulative. Which, like, okay, Freud. But then he says he cries during Pixar movies, but not during actual breakups. Make it make sense. I stared at the screen, my stomach folding in on itself. It wasn't just the jokes. It was my words. My quirks. The things I'd said in passing, in privacy. I checked the comments. People were loving it. Who is this man, OMG? Marry him or delete him, no in between. I feel spiritually connected to the soup take TBH. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even mean. But it was me. My weirdness, broadcast to strangers for entertainment. I texted her. "Hey, just saw your video." She replied almost instantly. "LOL, wasn't that wild? You inspired it, winky face, you're famous now." I waited. Nothing else came. I asked, "Did you think to ask me first?" She sent back, "Oh come on, it's anonymous. No one knows it's you unless you tell them." I didn't respond. Because that was the problem. She thought anonymity made it okay. That removing my name erased the intimacy. That changing the context turned a real moment into a punchline. But I knew. And now every time I looked at her, I wasn't sure if she was seeing me or scripting me. We saw each other once more after that. She invited me over for dinner. Said she was making risotto because it was the most emotionally manipulative grain. I laughed, but it felt off. We ate, talked, pretended like everything was normal. Then, halfway through dessert, she pulled out her phone and said, "Okay, I have to ask, can I record your reaction to this tweet? I feel like your face would sell the joke." I looked at her, really looked, and realized I wasn't a person to her. I was content, quotable, clippable, consumable. I said no. She blinked. "Oh, okay. You mad?" I shook my head. "Just done." I left without dessert. She didn't follow. Just texted the next day. "Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just thought we were vibing." I didn't reply. Because we weren't vibing. We were collaborating, and I never agreed to that. I still see her stuff sometimes. Her following's grown. She's funny, sharp, addictive to watch. But now I scroll with caution, looking for fragments of myself in her punchlines. Wondering how many others have been mined for laughs and left without credit. She once said people love the illusion of intimacy. I just didn't realize I was part of the illusion. Since then, I've become quieter on first dates. I don't talk about my fridge. I don't joke about soup. I don't offer up my strangeness like a snack. I met Grant on a dating app that described itself as for emotionally fluent adults, which, in hindsight, should have warned me. At the time, I found the refreshing. We messaged for around a week before meeting in person. Our conversations were thoughtful, if slightly formal. He asked questions like, "What lessons have your past relationships taught you about reciprocity? What's your attachment style, and how do you regulate it in conflict?" I should have paused then, but I didn't. I was flattered, curious, hungry for something that felt like intention. We met on a Thursday evening at a quiet cocktail bar. He was taller than I expected, clean-shaven, wearing a navy button-down and dark jeans. He shook my hand when we met, not coldly, but with a kind of deliberate firmness, like he was establishing terms. He ordered an old-fashioned. I got a gin and tonic. We sat in a corner booth, and from the moment we began talking, it felt more like an interview than a date, but not in a bad way. He was articulate, measured. He said things like, "I've done a lot of internal work around vulnerability, and I'm not interested in performative dating rituals." I found myself nodding along, even when I wasn't entirely sure what he meant. At one point, I mentioned that I'd been single for a while, not out of bitterness but choice, and he nodded approvingly. "It's important to know your baseline," he said. "Otherwise, you're just outsourcing your sense of value." It sounded wise. I liked the way he framed things, like everything could be understood with the right vocabulary. We left the bar after 2 drinks and walked for a while. He didn't try to hold my hand. He didn't lean in for a kiss. He just said, "This was genuinely enjoyable. I'd like to continue the conversation." I said yes. The next time we met, he brought a typed 2-page document. He handed it to me over coffee. "I know this might feel a little structured," he said, "but I found it helps clarify things early on." I looked down. The document was titled, "Relational Expectations and Boundaries, Gran A." I blinked. It was formatted like a syllabus. The first section outlined his core relational needs. Things like emotional transparency without emotional volatility, shared curiosity around personal development, physical intimacy grounded in mutual trust, not urgency. The next section listed boundaries. No passive communication, i.e., sulking, ghosting subtext. No sarcasm used to mask discomfort. No social media posts about the relationship without mutual consent. There was also a brief paragraph about preferred communication channels and a bullet point that read, "Sunday evenings are reserved for self-reflection and should not be interrupted unless pre-negotiated." I didn't know whether to laugh or admire the boldness. He watched me read it, calm and composed. "I know it's unusual," he said, "but I've found that transparency prevents confusion." I nodded slowly. "Is there a version of this where I respond?" He smiled. "Of course. If you feel compelled to articulate your own needs and boundaries, I'd welcome it." I didn't have a document. I had instincts. I had feelings that didn't fit into bullet points. But I told him I appreciated the clarity. He nodded, satisfied. We kept seeing each other. Our dates were scheduled in advance, sometimes 2 weeks out. He preferred intentional time blocks over spontaneous hangs. He often arrived with a list of conversation topics, things like the role of fear in decision-making or models of relational sustainability. He used the word intentional, so often it started to feel like a spell, one that made everything feel serious but not quite sacred. When we kissed, it was soft but restrained, like he was waiting for feedback. When we had sex, it was thoughtful and communicative, every motion negotiated in real time. I should have felt safe. Instead, I felt like I was being reviewed. Afterwards, he'd sometimes ask, "Was that experience aligned with your needs?" It wasn't unkind. It just felt clinical. One night, after dinner at his place, he sat me down on the couch and said he wanted to propose a shift. I braced myself. "I've really valued our time together," he began, "and I think we're in a good place to consider a more structured relational arrangement." I blinked. "What does that mean?" He handed me another document. This one was titled, "Relational Proposal, Phase 2. It outlined a non-romantic companionship model based on mutual benefit. He listed things I brought to the dynamic: emotional fluency, empathic conversational style, creative perspective, and things he could offer me in return: logistical support, career feedback, access to his professional network. He wrote, "I no longer feel romantic compatibility, but I deeply value the dynamic we've cultivated and believe we could transition gracefully into a more functional, platonic arrangement." I stared at the page. It felt like being fired from a job I didn't apply for. "I don't understand," I said. He folded his hands. "This is a shift in form, not in value. I still hold you in high esteem." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I didn't know how else to respond. "So you want to be friends?" He tilted his head. "Not quite. I'd call it a collaborative partnership." "And you thought this needed to be proposed?" He nodded. "I find that clarity reduces emotional residue." I stood up. "I think we're done here." He didn't argue, just walked me to the door and said, "I appreciate your openness throughout this process." It took me weeks to fully process what had happened. At first, I felt ridiculous, like I'd been naive to believe his structure meant sincerity. But then I realized it wasn't that he didn't care. It's that he cared in a way that prioritized control over connection. To him, emotions were logistical. Intimacy was a calendar event. Vulnerability was only valid if it could be measured and managed. He didn't want a relationship. He wanted a system. I still think about him sometimes, usually when I meet someone new and find myself over-explaining a boundary or sending a text that sounds more like a memo than a message. He taught me something unintentionally, that clarity isn't the same as closeness, that you can define a dynamic without ever actually stepping into it, and that love, real love, can't be proposed like a business plan. It has to be lived. Messy, unsure, unscored, a little less intentional, a little more alive. I met Fallon at a mutual friend's birthday party, a rooftop thing in late September, the kind where everyone pretends it's still summer even though the wind is already picking a fight. She was leaning against the railing, red Solo cup in hand, wearing a vintage denim jacket 2 sizes too big, and a look that said she'd seen through the party hours ago. I recognized her from Instagram. She'd popped up once in a photo my friend captioned, "My Muse and Menace," which felt like fair warning. When we started talking, it was effortless. She had that rare ability to make you feel like you were already in the middle of a conversation. She asked questions that weren't just small talk, but oddly specific. "What's your favorite kind of silence? Do you think people are more honest when they're texting or talking?" I answered both without thinking. That should have been my first clue. We sat on the fire escape for most of the night, talking about everything and nothing. She made fun of me for drinking cider. I teased her about her leather notebook, which she said she only used for emotional haiku and passive-aggressive grocery lists. I left that night with her number and the strange feeling that I'd already told her too much. Our first official hangout was at a used record store that served espresso in chipped ceramic cups. She were all black and smelled vaguely like eucalyptus. We wandered the aisles, trading stories the way some people trade baseball cards, carefully but with a quiet reverence. She made me feel interesting, like I was a rare species she'd just discovered and wanted to observe in its natural habitat. We saw each other a lot after that, always casually, always in public. She said she liked ambient noise when she was getting to know someone. Less pressure, more texture. Our conversations were like deep-sea dives, unpredictable and oddly buoyant. She asked about my childhood, my scars, literal and not, my worst heartbreak, my best day. I told her things I hadn't said out loud in years, things I hadn't planned on saying at all. Fallon never interrupted. She didn't offer advice. She just listened, like she was building a map in her head that only she could read. At the time, it felt like intimacy. Now I know it was inventory. It wasn't until our 6th or 7th hangout that I realized I didn't know much about her. I knew her favorite font, Garamond, her go-to comfort food, salted popcorn, and that she once spent a summer in Vienna trying to unlearn everything she'd been taught about desire. But I didn't know what she did for work, or whether she had siblings, or if she'd ever had her heart broken. Whenever I asked about her, she'd gently redirect the conversation, usually with a well-timed question that made me forget I'd asked one of my own. It didn't feel evasive. It felt like a game we were both playing, one I didn't realize I was losing. The turning point came on a Wednesday night. We were at her apartment, a small, plant-filled space with string lights and a bookshelf organized by mood instead of genre. We were sitting on the floor, drinking cheap red wine, and reading each other snippets of our teenage journals for laughs. At one point, I read an old entry about my dad leaving, something I hadn't looked at in years. I made fun of how dramatic I sounded, but my voice caught in the middle of a sentence. Fallon didn't laugh. She just looked at me for a long time, then said, "That's beautiful. The way you carry that." It was such an odd thing to say. Not "I'm sorry" or "that must have been hard." Just, beautiful. I didn't know what to do with that. So I nodded, and we moved on. 3 weeks later, I was in a group chat spiraling about what to get my sister for her birthday when a friend sent me a screenshot. "Dude, is this about you?" It was a post from a private Instagram account I didn't follow. One of those curated, aesthetic pages with vague captions and black and white photos of people looking wistful. The caption read, "Some people carry grief like a lantern. They don't want to fix it, they just don't want to be alone in the dark." Anonymous submission. But the quote was mine, word for word. Something I'd said to Fallon after telling her about my father. I stared at the post, blood cold. There were comments underneath. Dozens. People talking about how raw and real it felt. Some even tagging friends. "This is so you." I didn't know what to feel. Betrayal? Embarrassment? Exposure? I clicked on the account. It was Fallon's. Not under her real name, but her photo was in the profile picture, half obscured by a book. The account bio read, "Documenting emotional architecture. All submissions anonymous. DM to contribute." There were dozens of posts. Each caption was a quote, a moment, a fragment. Some were clearly from other people. But some, too many, were sentences I recognized. Things I'd said. Stories I'd shared. Not word for word, but close enough. Changed just enough to be deniable. But still mine. My heartbreak in someone else's font. I didn't message her right away. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say, or what I wanted her to say. Instead, I waited 2 days. Then I texted, "Hey, can we talk?" She replied instantly. "Of course," smiley face. "Wanna come by?" I still don't know why I went. Maybe I needed to see her face. When I arrived, she greeted me like nothing had changed. We sat on the couch. I didn't touch the tea she offered. "I saw your account," I said. She didn't flinch. "Which one?" "The emotional one. The quotes. The anonymous stuff." She tilted her head. "Oh, that." I waited. She said, "It's just a side project. A kind of digital archive." I nodded slowly. "You didn't tell me you were archiving me." Her face softened, like I was being overly sensitive. "I never used your name. I keep it anonymous. It's about resonance, not ownership." I blinked. "Resonance?" She leaned forward, voice gentle. "People connect with what you said. Isn't that kind of beautiful?" "No," I said, sharper than I meant. "It's invasive." She looked puzzled. "But you gave those stories to me. I didn't give them to your followers." She sighed. "You're not the only one. Everyone I talk to knows I collect moments. That's the whole idea. It's collaborative." I didn't agree to collaborate. Silence. She looked at me like I was being unreasonable, like I'd missed the point. Then she said, "You said you wanted to be seen." I didn't say I wanted to be quoted. I left without slamming the door. I wish I had. She never apologized, not really. She sent one message a few days later. "I'm sorry you felt exposed. That was never the intention." I never replied. It's been months. I still check the account sometimes. Not out of nostalgia. Out of paranoia. I scroll through the posts like they're surveillance footage, looking for pieces of myself in the captions, tracing my own pain through someone else's lens. Fallon still posts regularly. New quotes, new stories, new people. I wonder if they know. I wonder if they think she's listening, or if they realize she's recording. When I first met Caleb, I thought he was the best listener I'd ever met. We were seated next to each other at a friend's dinner party, one of those long, candlelit tables filled with too much wine and not enough chairs. He introduced himself with a half smile, said he was a social worker, and asked me what I'd been thinking about lately that I hadn't said out loud. It caught me off guard, in a good way. I told him I'd been thinking about how grief doesn't always come from loss, that sometimes it arrives from staying in the wrong place too long. He nodded like he already understood. We talked through dessert and well into the cleanup. When I left, he touched my arm gently and said, "You seem like someone who's lived through things and still came out kind." I remember blushing. I remember thinking, finally, someone who sees me beneath the surface. Our first date was a week later, at a quiet cafe where the music was too soft to hide behind. He asked about my family before we even ordered drinks. I told him about my mother's silence, my father's temper, the years I spent learning how to take up less space. He leaned in, elbows on the table, eyes steady. "You've survived a lot," he said. "That's rare." I didn't know what to say, so I smiled. Afterward, he texted me. "I felt honored to hear your story. Not everyone is brave enough to hold their own pain." I reread it twice, maybe 3 times. It felt like being seen, or so I thought. Over the next few weeks, our dates followed a pattern. He'd ask a question, always deep, always personal. I'd answer. He'd listen, nod, sometimes even tear up. Then he'd say something like, "You're incredibly self-aware," or "I'm drawn to how you've metabolized your pain." At first, it felt affirming. I'd spent years in therapy learning how to articulate what hurt. To have someone not only listen, but genuinely appreciate that seemed rare. Precious. But slowly, something began to feel off. I realized he never offered much in return. If I asked about his childhood, he'd say, "It was complicated," and redirect the conversation. If I asked about past relationships, he'd say, "I've dated people who weren't ready to face themselves." He said he didn't like to dwell, that he'd rather focus on what's active in the room. So we always focused on me. I told him about the time I was 19 and hospitalized for panic attacks, about the friend who ghosted me after I confided in her about childhood trauma, about the man who once told me I was too emotional to love properly. Each time, Caleb listened like I was delivering a sermon. "You're so emotionally literate," he'd say. "It's rare to find a woman who's done the work." It started to feel like I was auditioning for something I didn't remember signing up for. One night, we were watching a documentary about addiction. At one point, a woman began describing how her father's absence shaped her early relationships. Caleb turned to me and said, "That reminds me of what you said about your dad." I nodded. "You know," he continued, "most women with trauma learn to read people really well. It's a survival skill." He said it like a compliment. I asked, "Is that why you date women like me?" He paused, then smiled almost sheepishly. "I've always connected more with women who've been through things. They're more grounded, less entitled, less naive." I stared at him. He didn't seem to realize what he'd just admitted. Or maybe he did. That night, something shifted. I started paying attention to the way he spoke about his past partners. Always a variation of the same story. She hadn't processed her stuff, or she wasn't honest with herself, or she wanted love but not accountability. I began to wonder if he saw women as people, or as case studies. A few days later, I met one of his friends at a small gathering. She seemed surprised to see me. Said, "Oh, you're the new one." I asked what she meant. She laughed. "Caleb always finds the intense ones. He says he's drawn to women with emotional depth," which I think is code for trauma. I felt my stomach drop. She didn't mean it cruelly. She thought she was being friendly, letting me in on the joke. I smiled, excused myself, went home early. I sat on my couch that night, and tried to replay everything he'd said to me since we met. The flattery, the focus, the way he always seemed to steer the conversation back to my wounds, like they were the most interesting thing about me. I thought about how I'd never laughed with him until I cried, or danced with him in my kitchen, or shared a moment that wasn't somehow tethered to pain. Had we even talked about joy? Or was I just a mirror for the parts of him he didn't want to face? I confronted him a week later. We were walking in the park, holding hands. I stopped and said, "Do you like me, or do you like my pain?" He looked startled. "What kind of question is that?" "A serious one." He frowned. "I like that you're honest, that you don't hide from your past. That's not the same thing." He was quiet. I kept going. "You say you want connection, but you only ever ask about what broke me. You never ask what healed me. You never ask what I love or what makes me laugh or what I want to build." He looked hurt. "That's not fair. I've been present with you. You've been present with my pain," I said. "Not with me." He didn't respond, just looked away. I said, "I think you collect trauma. I think you feel closer to women who've been hurt because it lets you avoid your own mess. You get to sit in our pain without ever offering your own." Still no reply. I left him standing there, under a tree whose name I didn't know. He didn't call. It's been months. I've thought about Caleb more than I care to admit. Not because I miss him, but because I'm still untangling the way he made me feel, flattered and exposed, wanted and reduced, heard but never understood. He taught me something I wish I didn't have to learn. That not everyone who listens is listening for the right reasons. Some listen to understand, some listen to control, and some listen just long enough to feel superior. I'm more careful now. I still share, still open up, but I pay attention to who's asking and why. Because my story is not an artifact. It's not a test, or fuel, or a mirror for someone else's avoidance. It's mine, and I get to decide who gets to hold it. I met Milo at a friend's gallery show, one of those events where everyone's pretending they're not judging the art, but they definitely are. He was standing in front of a canvas that looked like someone had dragged a dirty mop across it, nodding like it was profound. I made a joke about how it looked like depression in brushstrokes, and he turned to me and said, "Exactly." I laughed. "You don't even know what I said." He grinned and shrugged. "Doesn't matter." Felt true. That was how it started. We talked for almost an hour that night, about music that made us cry, about how neither of us could keep houseplants alive, about the weird ache of Sundays. He had this way of holding eye contact that made you feel like you were being listened to with his whole body. It was disarming. He asked for my number before I left. Said it like a question he already knew the answer to. I liked that. Our first date was at a bookstore cafe. He showed up in a denim jacket and a navy t-shirt that smelled faintly like cedar. He ordered an oat milk latte and asked me what I was most embarrassed to love. I said 80s karaoke ballads. He said home renovation shows. We were both trying to be honest, and it worked. We talked for 4 hours straight that day. He told me about his job, something in user experience design that I didn't totally understand, but he spoke about it like it mattered. Like he cared about how people move through spaces, how they feel when they touch things. That's what stood out about him, actually. He cared about feelings, not just his own, everyone's. He asked questions like, "What's your default defense mechanism? How do you know when someone's safe? What's something you've never admitted out loud?" It felt like we were building something, carefully, like stacking stones, one on top of the other. The second time we saw each other, he brought me a book. Something he said reminded him of the way I talked. He'd underlined a passage and dog-eared the page. When I read it later, it was about wanting to be known without explanation. I remember feeling my chest unlock a little. We weren't rushing anything. It was slow, deliberate. Texts in the morning, long phone calls at night. He asked me to send voice notes because he liked the cadence of my thoughts. He said it helped him feel closer, like I was in the room even when I wasn't. It felt real. The first time we kissed, it was after he helped me move a bookshelf I'd bought off Craigslist. We were sweaty and laughing and slightly out of breath. He leaned in like he'd been waiting for the right moment, not the most romantic one, but the most honest. His lips were soft, hesitant, like he was asking permission even as he did it. I liked that too. We kept things quiet. Not secret, just ours. He said he liked the slowness, that he didn't want to rush into something and ruin it by making it performative. It sounded mature, thoughtful. So I agreed, and for a while it felt easy. Until it didn't. The first red flag didn't look red at all. It looked beige, neutral, Like nothing. He canceled a date last minute. Said something had come up at work. Fine. But then it happened again. And again. Always last minute. Always vague. I didn't push at first. I wanted to be understanding. I told myself he was just overwhelmed. Burnout. Deadlines. Life. But the distance grew. Subtle but steady. A few slower replies. A few more missed calls. A few let's reschedule texts that felt like sighs in emoji form. The night everything cracked, I was at a bar with friends. One of them, Marion, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Isn't that your guy?" I turned and followed her finger to the back of the room. Milo, sitting at a corner table, holding hands with a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a wedding catalog. They weren't just close. They were together. Familiar. Intimate. I froze. It was like watching a movie scene I didn't remember auditioning for. They leaned in, kissed lightly. She laughed. He touched her cheek. My heart didn't race. It stopped. I left without saying anything. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I got in a car and stared out the window like the city was going to explain something to me. Later that night, I texted him. "Want to talk?" He called immediately. His voice was soft. Careful. "I can explain," he said. And then he did. He told me he was engaged. That it was complicated. That they'd been together forever and had grown apart. That they were on a break, kind of. That he wasn't sure what he wanted and needed time to figure it out. And then he said it. "You helped me realize what I've been missing." Like I was some kind of emotional taste test. I didn't yell. Didn't cry. I just went quiet. "How long were you going to wait to tell me?" I asked. "I didn't expect this to become real," he said. "I didn't think I'd feel this strongly." That's what people always say when they're caught. Like their feelings absolve the betrayal. I asked if she knew. He said no. So I was the experiment. The test drive. The emotional mirror he needed to look into so he could decide whether to stay or go. And the worst part, I did feel something real. That was never the problem. The problem was that he made me believe I was the only one feeling it. I ended it that night. Told him not to call. Not to text. Not to explain. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want closure. I just wanted out. But in the weeks after, I kept replaying everything. Every soft look. Every thoughtful message. Every question that felt like it came from a place of depth. And I wondered, was any of it real? Or was I just a safe place to rehearse his exit? A month later, I saw a post online. An engagement photo. Her in a white dress. Him in the same navy jacket. They looked happy. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I missed him, but because I missed the us I thought we were building. I missed the version of him that only existed with me. The one who listened. The one who noticed. The one who asked about my favorite sound and remembered it a week later. I know now that people can be two things at once. Milo was kind. And selfish. He was present. And dishonest. He was gentle. And cowardly. He wanted love. But didn't know how to earn it. The first time I met Amara, I thought she was someone I'd imagined. Not in a manic pixie dream girl way. I'm not 12. But in that way where someone walks into the room and makes the air change. Like they're tuned to a different frequency, and you're just catching the signal for the first time. She sat down across from me at a candlelit bar in the Lower Haight, wearing this deep green wrap dress that made her look like she'd walked out of a painting. Her hair was coiled high on her head, a few curls falling like punctuation marks along her cheekbones. She smiled like she knew something I didn't, like she'd already read the last page of my story and was just waiting for me to catch up. We met on a Sunday night, which already felt like a choice. I remember thinking, no one agrees to a first date on a Sunday unless they're either deeply sincere or quietly chaotic. Turned out she was both. What stood out from the beginning was how good she was at asking questions, not the surface level stuff. She didn't care what I did for work or whether I liked dogs. She asked what I daydreamed about when I couldn't sleep. She asked what I wanted to be as a kid before the world got to me. She asked what I thought happened in the 5 seconds after we die. And she listened. Not the kind of listening people do when they're just waiting to talk. Real listening. The kind that makes you want to tell her things you hadn't even admitted to yourself yet. "Do you think you're more skilled at loving or being loved?" she asked halfway through the date, sipping her drink slowly like she already knew my answer. I said loving, and she nodded like it confirmed something. Most people would have made that kind of question feel like a trap. With her, it felt like an invitation. By the end of the night, I was pretty sure I wanted to see her again. Not because she dazzled me or flirted or performed, but because she made me feel like I was worth studying. That should have been my first clue. Our second date was a walk through the botanical garden. She wore loose linen pants and a white t-shirt with a faded graphic of a cassette tape. She brought a flask of herbal tea and shared it with me like we were old friends on a porch somewhere. At one point, we sat under a tree and watched a group of kids chase a balloon that had escaped. She looked at me and said, "Do you think you'll ever be ready to fully be known by someone?" I didn't know how to answer that. I tried to laugh it off, but the way she looked at me made it impossible. Like she was holding up a mirror I hadn't seen before. I told her I didn't know. She said, "That's honest." Most people would have said yes just to sound brave. That was the thing about Amara. She made you feel like being uncertain was a kind of wisdom. Like not knowing made you more worthy of love, not less. By the fourth time we saw each other, I'd started to feel like we were circling something. Not quite dating, not quite friends. A strange in-between that felt too intentional to be casual. She'd text me at odd hours with questions like, "What color do you think your sadness would be?" Or, "Have you ever felt safe in silence?" I started keeping a note in my phone just to track her questions. Not because I thought they led anywhere, but because they made me feel more real. Like I was slowly unfolding in front of someone who wasn't afraid of what she'd find. Then came the night at her apartment. It was small, full of plants and incense and books stacked like tectonic plates. She lit a candle before we sat down. Said it helped her anchor the space. I didn't ask what that meant. We talked for hours. Laughed too. She told me a story about getting kicked out of a silent meditation retreat for sneezing too loudly. I told her I once cried during a Coldplay concert and blamed it on allergies. At some point, the conversation slowed. She leaned in, her knee brushing mine. Her hand grazed my wrist, not possessively, but like she was checking my pulse. We kissed. It was slow, thoughtful. Her fingers curled into the back of my neck, and for a moment, I forgot every bad date I'd ever been on. Every time I'd been ghosted or breadcrumbed or told I was too much for someone who didn't know what they wanted. That kiss felt like being chosen. But afterward, she pulled back and looked at me like she was trying to read the fine print on my soul. "You're very open," she said. "Is that a good thing?" "It's rare," she said. "Useful." I didn't think much of it at the time, but in hindsight, useful should have made me pause. The unraveling started 3 weeks in. We were lying on her floor, heads resting on opposite ends of a yoga mat, sharing a bowl of dried mangoes and talking about intimacy. She asked me what I thought about polyamory. I said I respected it, but didn't think I was built for it. She nodded. "You're definitely a synchronizer." I blinked. "A what?" She smiled. Synchronizer. It's one of the 10 profiles in emotional compatibility theory. You pair deeply. You're rhythm-based. You match energy instead of chasing it. I laughed. "Is that like a real thing?" She turned and looked at me with a softness that almost masked the intensity behind it. "I'm a compatibility consultant," she said. I didn't want to lead with that because it makes people think I'm judging them. I sat up. "Wait, like a dating coach?" She shook her head. "No. I study patterns. I help people understand how they connect emotionally. I work with therapists, couples, app developers. It's more analytical than romantic." I nodded slowly, trying to absorb it. "So, have you been analyzing me this whole time?" She hesitated. "I've been observing you. There's a difference." I didn't say anything. Just let that sentence hang in the air like smoke. After a few seconds, she added, "I'm working on a new model. A framework. I've been collecting real-world data." "From people you're dating?" "From people I'm learning from." I exhaled, sharp and quick. "So I'm a case study?" "No," she said gently. "You're a mirror. That's different." I stood up. Not angry. Just disoriented. "I don't know what that means." She sat up too. Crossed her legs. "You're not a subject. You're a reflection. You're helping me test the vocabulary, the emotional sequences. But not in a cold way. I care. Deeply." "That doesn't make it better," I said. "It makes it messier." She reached out, touched my hand. "I didn't lie to you." "No," I said. "But you didn't tell the truth either." I left soon after. Didn't slam the door. Didn't raise my voice. I just told her I needed space. She didn't chase me. The next day, she sent a voice memo. "I know this feels manipulative. I understand that. But it was never about you being a project. It was about recognizing patterns. And you're the first person who made me question the whole system." I didn't reply. I listened to that message a dozen times before deleting it. It's been a few months now. I still think about her. Not in the way you miss someone who broke your heart, but in the way you miss someone who made you feel like you finally made sense. I wonder if I'll ever show up in her research. If I'll be one of the examples under synchronizer, prone to early emotional bonding, values congruence over novelty. I hope not. Or maybe I hope I do. Maybe that means I mattered. I don't regret meeting her. I regret not asking more questions. I regret letting myself believe that being seen and being studied were the same thing. I wasn't really trying to date. You know those weird in-between phases where everything in your life feels like a shrug? That was me. I had just moved into a one-bedroom apartment with carpet that felt like Velcro, blinds that wouldn't close all the way, and a kitchen light that flickered like it was haunted. My neighbor vacuumed every night at 1 a.m. like it was a ritual. I was eating cereal for most meals and pretending that was a lifestyle choice. One night, I was scrolling through the app one kept deleting and re-downloading like it was some kind of toxic ex. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I wasn't even looking for interesting. Just something to distract me from the weird clanking under my sink. That's when I saw Elian. His profile wasn't trying too hard. A few selfies, nothing dramatic. One from a concert, one with a golden retriever that looked too clean to be his. He had this laid-back look. The kind of guy who probably made perfect scrambled eggs and wore sweatshirts that somehow looked cool. His first message came an hour after we matched. Okay, but pineapple on pizza. Yes or no? I said yes, and he replied, risky. I like it. It was dumb. It was simple. But it was the first time in a while someone made me smile through the screen. We started talking a lot. He was funny, but in a quiet way. Not the kind of guy who tries to dominate a room. More like the guy who whispers a joke that makes only you laugh. And somehow that means more. He said he worked in sound editing for indie films. I didn't fully understand what that meant, but it sounded creative and mildly mysterious. He told me he once got locked inside a pet store by accident. I told him I once got kicked out of a marshmallow factory tour for touching a cooling tray. It was easy. Our first date was at this weird bowling alley/bar hybrid. The lights were low, the tables were sticky, and the music was loud enough to make talking kind of a challenge. But still we laughed. He wore a hoodie that looked soft enough to sleep in and smelled like laundry and citrus. I liked that he didn't seem like he was trying to impress me. He just was. Afterward, he sent me a text. You ate tonight easy. It made no sense, but I liked it anyway. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other a lot. Not like big, dramatic dates. More like lazy, comfortable ones. Grocery store trips with no agenda. YouTube spirals on his couch. Midnight cereal and half-watched movies. I'd come over after work, and we'd just exist near each other quietly. I liked it. I liked him. He told me he had a roommate. I didn't think much of it. Rent in the city was brutal, and every guy I dated either had roommates or pretended they didn't. I never met her, though. He said she worked nights or was usually out with friends. That tracked. I didn't push. But then little things started to feel off. One night, I was brushing my teeth in his bathroom and noticed there were 2 toothbrushes in the holder. One was clearly used, not like a backup or a guest brush. I asked him about it casually when I came out, and he kind of paused before saying, "Oh, that's my roommate's. She leaves it in here sometimes." Okay. Weird, but okay. Another time, I opened a drawer looking for a spoon and saw a bunch of folded notes with hearts drawn on them. I didn't read them, but I asked about them. He laughed and said, "We write each other dumb stuff sometimes." Still weird, but I was trying not to be the girl who makes everything into a conspiracy. Then came the framed photos. On the bookshelf. Not just group shots, but the 2 of them, holding hands in one, laughing in another. A snow globe from Paris that he said was hers, but she just likes to leave it out. There were signs everywhere. Her shampoo in the shower. Her coat by the door. A necklace on the counter that he moved gently to the side, saying, "Careful, she gets mad if that tangles." I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was getting harder to pretend I didn't notice the pattern. So I asked him, straight up, "Is your roommate your ex?" He didn't even hesitate. "Yeah. I mean, we broke up a few months ago, but we're still figuring things out." That sentence hit me like cold water. I just stared at him. He looked at me like I was being dramatic, like I should be cool with this. "Does she know you're dating other people?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't really talk to her about it." I left not long after. I didn't make a scene. I just told him I needed some air. When I got home, I started replaying everything. Every time he'd insisted we hang out at his place. Every time he'd taken too long to reply to a text when I knew he was home. The time he said, "We're redoing the living room," like it was still theirs. I sent him a long message the next day. I told him I wasn't mad that he had a past. I wasn't mad that he lived with someone. I was mad that he didn't tell me. That he let me feel like I was building something real while hiding half the story. I told him I didn't want to be a side character in someone else's breakup. He replied with something vague. Said he didn't expect to catch feelings. Said he thought he could compartmentalize better. Compartmentalize. Like I was a file in a drawer. Like his life was a storage unit and I was just another box he'd labeled maybe. After that, I stopped talking to him. Didn't block him. Just muted him. A couple weeks later, I got a message from an unknown number. I read everything. "Thanks for being honest." I didn't reply. I knew it was her. Part of me felt bad for her. Part of me wanted to tell her everything. Part of me knew she already knew. It's strange how someone can make you feel seen one minute and invisible the next. Like you were real until it became inconvenient. Until the truth got too close. Looking back, I think what hurt most wasn't that he still lived with his ex. It was that I felt like we were building something. I let him in. I let myself get comfortable. I brought snacks to his apartment and left my lip balm on his nightstand. I memorized the way he said banana, like it was a 2-syllable word. I was there, and he was somewhere else. Maybe still in that shared apartment. Maybe still stuck in a version of the past he couldn't let go of. Maybe just too afraid to be alone. I don't know, but I do know I wasn't the one he chose to be honest with. And that's enough for me to walk away. I met Elias at a poetry reading I almost didn't attend. It was raining, typical, and I'd had one of those days where time moved like wet cement. I was tired, frayed around the edges, and the last thing I wanted to do was stand around sipping boxed wine, while strangers read poems about their exes like they'd just invented heartbreak. But I went. Mostly because I'd promised my friend Rachel, who was reading that night. Also because there's a part of me that always shows up, even when I don't want to. A reflex, maybe? Elias was standing near the back when I arrived, tall, angular, wearing a worn black sweater and holding a tiny notebook like it was a cigarette. He looked like someone who'd been emotionally wrecked by a Sufjan Stevens album and never fully recovered. We locked eyes briefly. He nodded. I nodded back. After Rachel read, I stepped outside for air, and he followed me out. We ended up talking under the awning for 20 minutes. About writing mostly. About the difference between vulnerability and performance. He said he hated most contemporary poetry because it weaponized trauma in a way that felt dishonest. I said I appreciated any poetry that didn't use ellipses like glitter. He laughed. It was a good laugh. Unpretentious. We exchanged numbers before I left. He texted me later that night. "Today was gray, but you weren't." I smiled. Typed, deleted, then replied. "Careful. I'm not always this legible." He sent back a winking emoji. No words. We started texting every day after that. Not just small talk. Real things. Stories. Fragments. Snippets of essays we hadn't written yet. Memories that felt like they still belonged to someone else. He sent me a playlist called For Walking at Night in Cities You Mississippi. It was perfect. Our first date was at a used bookshop that doubled as a tea bar. He wore a navy button-down and smelled faintly of bergamot and something woodsy. We walked the aisles slowly, pulling down books and reading each other lines we liked. At one point, he handed me a dog-eared copy of James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room and said, "This is the loneliest book I've ever loved." I didn't ask what he meant. I just nodded. Because I felt it too. We sat on a bench outside the shop afterward, sipping tea and watching the sky bruise toward evening. He asked me about my writing. I told him I hadn't published much lately. That I'd been too careful. Too guarded. He looked at me and said, "You don't seem guarded. You seem precise." That one sentence cracked something open in me. With Elias, I felt like I was finally allowed to be complicated. Messy. In progress. He didn't flinch when I told him about my panic attacks or how I sometimes cried in the frozen food aisle for no reason. He just listened. Asked questions. Never tried to fix it. We started seeing each other regularly. Late dinners. Long walks. Occasional sleepovers that weren't about sex so much as proximity. I'd wake up and find him already writing in his notebook, brow furrowed like he was translating a dream. Once, I asked what he wrote about. "Everything," he said. "Whatever lingers." He'd read bits to me sometimes. Vague things. Abstract. But beautiful. He said he wasn't ready to share much yet. That he was working on something longer. A collection of essays. I didn't push. I was falling for him in that quiet way that you don't notice until you've already landed. There was no grand moment. Just a series of small ones. Him tucking my hair behind my ear mid-sentence. The way he always remembered to bring my favorite granola bar on hikes. How he'd rest his head on my shoulder when he couldn't sleep. It felt safe. It felt real. Until it didn't. It started with a sentence. A friend sent me a link to an online literary magazine. Said, "This sounds like something you'd write." I clicked the link. The essay was titled "The Woman in the Middle of the Story." The author, Elias K. I froze. The first paragraph was almost word for word a story I'd told him on our third date. About the time I got lost in a foreign city and ended up at a puppet show in a language I didn't speak. He'd laughed when I told him. Said it was the most accidentally poetic thing he'd ever heard. Now here it was in print. Slightly reworded. Stylized. But unmistakably mine. I kept reading. The essay wasn't just about the puppet show. It was about me. Not by name, but by detail. The frozen food aisle crying. The ankle scar from a childhood bike crash. The line I'd once said, half drunk, half serious, that some people want to be loved and some people want to be known, and I'm not sure we get both. He'd used it as the closing sentence. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. It wasn't just that he'd written about me. It was that he'd done it without telling me. That he'd taken my vulnerability and turned it into content. That he'd used my voice as his own. I didn't text him right away. I needed time to decide what kind of anger I was allowed to feel. When I finally did reach out, I kept it simple. "Hey, read your essay." He replied quickly. "Was gonna send it to you. It just went live." I waited. Nothing else came. So I asked, "Did you think to ask me first?" He replied, "It's not about you. It's about the idea of you. There's a difference." That's when my stomach turned. Because I'd heard that before. From men who didn't want to be accused of stealing, but didn't want to credit the source either. Men who used inspiration as a shield. I called him. He answered on the second ring. Sounded calm. Like he was expecting this. "I didn't name you," he said. "I changed details. You used my words," I said. "You used my life." He paused. "I thought you'd be flattered. You said you wanted to be seen." "I didn't say I wanted to be published." Silence. He exhaled. "I write what I feel. That's all I've ever done." "No," I said. "You write what I feel. That's different." He didn't respond. I hung up. In the weeks that followed, I kept waiting for an apology that never came. What I got instead were more essays. More pieces published in obscure but respectable journals. I read each one like someone scanning a crime scene for fingerprints. And I found them. My metaphors. My grief. My stories. Rewritten. Reframed. But mine. I started to feel hollowed out. Like I'd been mined. My voice, once something I protected like a candle in the wind, now echoed back at me in someone else's prose. I stopped writing for a while. Couldn't find the point. Every sentence felt like a risk. Every paragraph a potential theft. And isn't that the worst kind of betrayal? Not the romantic kind, but the creative one. The kind where someone doesn't just break your heart, they borrow your soul and forget to return it. Months later, I saw him at another reading. He was standing near the back again, same sweater, same notebook. When he saw me, he smiled. Small. Careful. I didn't smile back. I walked past him and sat in the front row. During the Q&A, someone asked him what inspires his writing. He answered, "People who let me in." I stood and left before he finished the sentence. I've started writing again. Slowly. Privately. Not everything needs to be shared. I should have known from the first invitation. It wasn't a date. Not really. Just a few of us meeting up at this wine bar. Super chill. You should come. Rowan sent the invite in a text with a dancing emoji and no punctuation, which somehow made it feel both casual and urgent. We'd only texted for a few days after matching on the app. Nothing intense. Just easy banter, quick jokes, a shared love of niche snacks and weird documentaries. I wasn't expecting fireworks, but I also wasn't expecting a group. Still, I said yes. I showed up at the spot, a dim, semi-fancy place with overpriced cheese plates and people who wore turtlenecks unironically. Rowan waved me over to a corner booth full of 5 other people. No name tags. No intros. Just a quick, "This is him," like I was a surprise guest on a talk show. I sat down in the only open seat, which happened to be across from a guy named Micah, who immediately asked me if I'd ever tried ayahuasca. Rowan seemed at ease, sipping her orange wine, laughing with the guy next to her, some dude in a denim jacket who clearly knew his way around a smirk. I tried to play along, asked questions, listened, smiled, but the whole time, I was trying to figure out where I fit. She didn't really talk to me. Not directly. Just included me in her laughter, tossed me a comment here and there. Enough to make me feel seen, but not enough to feel chosen. At the end of the night, she gave me a quick hug and said, "This was fun. Let's do it again." I told myself it was just a casual first hang. That maybe she was shy. That maybe this was her way of easing into new connections. I didn't realize I was already losing the game. The next time we met up, it was another group thing. A trivia night at a bar that smelled like damp wood and fried pickles. This time, she introduced me to people by name. Even offered to grab me a drink. Progress. But then I noticed the same guy from before, denim jacket, was there again. This time, they sat next to each other. Their knees touched under the table. She laughed at his jokes before he finished them. I tried not to read into it. Maybe they were friends. Maybe she was just flirty. Maybe I was being insecure. I kept showing up. Game nights. Picnics. Birthday drinks for people I didn't know. Once, a movie night where they watched an obscure horror film in someone's backyard and passed around a single bottle of mezcal like it was communion. I was always invited. Never alone. And always he was there too. His name was Reed. He was charming in that understated way that makes you feel like you're trying too hard by comparison. He played guitar but didn't talk about it. He worked in something vague like creative strategy. He wore rings. Rowan always seemed buzzed around him. Not drunk, just alive. Like she was tuned to a different frequency when he was near. I kept waiting for a clue. A clear line. Something that would let me know if this was worth holding on to. She never gave one. But she kept texting me. Kept inviting me. Kept responding with "OMG yes, and you're the funniest, and I'm so glad you came." It was just enough to stay hopeful. Then came the night that broke it. She invited me to a chill dinner at her place. Said it was just a few friends. I showed up with wine and a dumb joke rehearsed in my head. She opened the door barefoot, wearing a big sweater and leggings, her hair in a messy bun that looked too good to be accidental. There were 7 people there. I didn't know any of them. Reed, of course, was already on the couch, legs crossed, sipping from a mug like he lived there. I sat in the corner of the room, smiling, nodding, asking the usual get-to-know-you questions. Then during dinner, chickpea stew and crusty bread, someone made a toast. A woman with pink hair raised her glass and said, "To Rowan's bravery," for finally saying something. Everyone clinked glasses. Rowan blushed. I didn't understand. Later, in the kitchen, I asked her, "What was the toast about?" She looked at me, eyes caught mid-flicker. "Oh, nothing. Just some drama." I waited. She sighed. I told Reed how I felt. That I liked him. I nodded slowly. "And?" She smiled. "He said he needed time to figure things out. But he didn't say no." I stood there, holding an empty glass, heart sinking into the floor. She touched my arm. "I'm so glad you came tonight, though." I didn't know what to say. I left early. She gave me a Tupperware container of leftovers like that made it okay. On the walk home, everything clicked. The group dates. The careful casualness. The way she always made sure Reed was around when I was. The way she'd laugh louder, touch her hair more, when he was in the room. I wasn't the date. I was the decoy. I was the person she used to trigger his attention, to create tension, to make herself seem wanted. I was the pawn. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I stopped replying to her texts. She sent one a week later. "Missed you at game night. Hope everything's okay." I didn't answer. She didn't try again. And that told me everything. I don't think she meant to hurt me. I think she was just caught in her own drama, trying to create a love story out of thin air, using the people around her like props. But I wasn't a prop. I was a person. And I deserved more than to be someone else's plot device. It started like every other match I shouldn't have trusted. Sarah messaged me within 10 minutes of matching. Normally that would have felt a little eager, but her first message wasn't flirtatious, it was specific. "You mentioned you love the band Low Roar. What's your favorite album, and why isn't it Zero?" I laughed. It was an inside baseball kind of question, the kind only someone who actually listens would ask. I replied with a paragraph about how once in a long while is underrated, and 2 minutes later, she sent back a voice note agreeing with me. Her voice was soft, deliberate, like someone who thought before she spoke. She had a slight rasp at the end of her sentences that made everything sound like a secret. I played it twice. We messaged all day. She referenced books I'd mentioned in old public posts, ones I'd forgotten I'd even talked about. She joked about my favorite directors, quoted one of my tweets back to me, slightly embarrassing, and said she'd always wanted to meet someone who understood melancholy that doesn't need to be fixed. I should have paused there, but I didn't. Instead, I thought, finally, someone who gets it. Our first date was a bookstore cafe. She wore dark jeans, a gray wool coat, and no makeup that I could tell. Her hair was tucked into her collar, and she smelled like cardamom and something faintly citrusy. When she hugged me hello, her body was warm and firm and real. We sat in the corner by the window. She ordered an espresso and a copy of Ocean Vuong's Night Sky with Exit Wounds. I joked that she was trying too hard to impress me. She said, "No. I just like when people feel seen." We talked about everything. Childhood. Movies. The weird tension in being someone who's both analytical and romantic. She told me she liked the way my mind worked. That she'd never met someone who paused mid-sentence to find the right metaphor. She said it like it was rare. Like I was rare. That was the first time I felt the flicker of something off. But it passed. The next few dates were just as smooth. Too smooth. She brought up a short story I once published in a niche literary magazine. Said it made her cry. She knew my favorite tea brand. She picked a playlist that included a song I'd once called The Sound of My Grief. I didn't even remember saying that. I asked how she knew. She smiled and said, "I pay attention." And I wanted to believe that. I really did. Because she made it so easy. She laughed at the right moments. Got quiet when I needed space. Touched my wrist when I was spiraling during a story. Once, when I was talking about my mom's health, she just reached over and held my hand without saying anything. It felt like she knew me. But at some point, I realized I didn't know her. Not really. She told me surface-level things. That she worked in digital marketing. That she had a dog named Luca. That she was an only child. But there were no stories. No messy, unplanned tangents. No accidental reveals. It was like every sentence had been edited. It was a Tuesday night when it started to unravel. We were at her apartment, sleek, minimal, all in neutrals. Everything smelled like lavender and vetiver. I was looking for a charger and opened the wrong drawer. Inside were printed pages. Dozens of them. Some were articles. Others were my tweets. My Medium posts. A few were screenshots of old bios from websites where I'd been listed as a guest speaker. One was a transcript of a podcast I'd been on 3 years earlier. It was a dossier. I stood there holding one of the pages, not moving. She walked in, saw me, and froze. I didn't say anything right away. Just held up the paper. She set down her mug and said, "I can explain." I forced a laugh. "I'd like that." She sat on the edge of the couch, carefully. Like one wrong move might shatter the room. "I do backgrounding for a living," she said. "Brand research. Reputation management. It's part of my job to know things. I guess. I just couldn't turn it off." I said nothing. She added, "You're very searchable. And very consistent. That's rare." That word again. Rare. She said she'd looked me up after our first date. That she was curious. That she wanted to understand me before investing her time. That she didn't want to waste either of our energy on something that didn't have potential. So she studied me. And then she mirrored me. I asked her point blank, "Were you ever just yourself with me?" She looked up. Her eyes were glassy but not wet. "I don't know." And that was the most honest thing she'd said. Because the truth is, I don't think she meant to manipulate me. I think she was trying to be what she thought I needed. I think she believed that if she reflected me back perfectly, I'd finally feel at home. But people aren't mirrors. They're windows. Or doors. Or mazes. And I wanted to walk through her, not see myself in her. I left that night without a fight. No shouting. No accusations. Just silence. She texted me 2 days later. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't know how else to connect." I didn't reply. Because I didn't know what would have been real anymore. Was she drawn to me, or to the version of me she had studied and memorized? Did she love my stories, or the way they made her seem more compatible? Did I fall for her, or for the version of myself she projected back onto me? I still think about her sometimes. In quiet moments. When I'm listening to music she once sent me, or when I read a line in a book that sounds like something she would have underlined. And I wonder, if we'd met by accident, if she hadn't known anything about me, would we still have connected? Or was the connection just a trick of the light? A mirror, placed at the right angle, reflecting back the person I already believed I was.